What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we are continuing on with Earth X, and God, I love Earth X so much. I love this story. It's so cool. It's such a cool idea. A dystopian future in Marvel Comics where everything in terms of like history is still the same, but like one event happened and changed the future of everything. It's like Marvel Ruins. Marvel Ruins asked the question, what would happen if people actually, if they actually gained their powers in the real world, or if they were actually exposed to the accidents that gave them their powers in the real world? And it all turns out really dark. Like it gets really messed up. But again, with the first story, one of the big things that was going on with Captain America was that he had like turned down the office of the President of the United States, right? And so because of that, like the American people kind of turned their backs on him. They were just sort of like, well, then if you don't want to lead us, then we don't want to be a part of what you have going on. And he kind of just became not really a pariah so much as just an outlier. He was just a guy who was there. And then this was compounded by the fact that for some reason, somewhere along the line, suddenly everybody started developing powers. And so it became kind of crazy because now Captain America was obsolete because everybody had powers. So there was really no one for Captain America to really rescue aside from those who were maybe injured or infirm or something along those lines. But a majority of people could just save themselves. But the whole idea was that when he was dealing with the Hydra, which is basically just kind of like a space organism that showed up on Earth and had taken over, like Jennifer Walters, She-Hulk, and a handful of other people and was trying to spread itself outside of New York, that one of the individuals who had been taken was wearing a Red Skull shirt. And that kind of set Captain America on this path of trying to find the newly returned Red Skull as he believed him to be. And so what this does is it leads us to California. And again, this is kind of crazy because like New York itself, California has basically fallen. And that's one of the themes that you guys are going to notice here, that for the most part, where we would believe that like the rise of superpowers on Earth would lead to a kind of age of heroes in the sense that it would basically be this place where it would be almost utopian, where it would be like a higher state of being and everything would be better and so on and so forth. Instead, it became this kind of land of do as you please, to quote V for Vendetta. And so the result is that people just kind of do whatever it is that they want to. And it gave rise to petty warlords because for those individuals who gained powers but never took the steps necessary to learn what it meant to have power, they've just suddenly realized they can do anything they want to. And so leading up into California itself, again, like New York, it's basically collapsed. It's just kind of like this place where things happen and stuff goes on, and that's really about it. And a petty warlord has effectively risen to power. Now, what ends up happening here is in the middle of all this, Namor the Submariner returns. Now remember, we talked about this in the last video. Namor the Submariner had killed Johnny Storm when Namor had allied himself with Dr. Doom, and a fight broke out between these two groups, or I guess this group and the Fantastic Four. And so the result was that with the death of Johnny Storm, Franklin Richards freaked out, and he basically used his reality warping powers and forced one half of the body of Namor the Submariner to burn anytime he wasn't in water. And so as a result, he basically makes his presence here and kind of pops up because people are essentially infiltrating the seas and they're going through and kind of doing whatever it is that they want. And he really kind of considers it to be like an affront, more or less, like breaking into a man's house, that kind of a thing. And so the result is that we actually move from that and switch over to Peter Parker with his daughter who's become Venom. Now I want you to notice something here. And this is something that I thought about talking about in the last video, but I thought it would be more pertinent to talk about here. Peter Parker is nothing like he used to be. The whole nature of Peter Parker when it comes to him being Spider-Man, historically speaking in Marvel Comics, is yes, he has his ups and downs, he has his good times and his bad times, but the idea is that for the most part, Peter Parker is optimistic. He really sees like the glass half full. And because of that, he's very much one of these characters that's kind of like a bright shining star in Marvel Comics that I wouldn't necessarily say people idolize, but he certainly brightens up a story a little bit if it's going in a darker direction. But in this instance, Peter Parker's cynical. He's really kind of like, there's no need for us here anymore. There's no need for us to be superheroes. And that's kind of funny because it almost indicates that Peter Parker's perspective of himself in the world walks the knife's edge. Peter Parker sees himself as relevant only so far as there's someone for him to protect. Now, he also, of course, was married somewhere along the line, hence the birth of Mayday Parker. We can probably assume it was Mary Jane Watson. I don't believe we're explicitly told, at least not that I recall. But the fact remains here that somewhere along the line, the daughter of Peter Parker gained the Venom symbiote. And this is kind of interesting because Peter's initial stance is no matter how hard you try, in the end, it will take you over. But the indication here is that Mayday Parker is actually in control of the Venom symbiote. Not only that, Peter and his daughter are basically not really estranged so much as they're not really close to each other. They're not like the kind of relationship you would expect with a father and a daughter, kind of providing these pearls of wisdom, teaching his daughter how to become a woman, how to function as a superhero. And that's what's so ironic about this is because in a lot of ways, Peter was one of the first. He was one of the first superheroes to rise to prominence in Marvel Comics. And so if ever there were a a person to basically be tutored under, it's Peter Parker. And so that's what's so ironic about this, is Peter being one of the, really kind of like the face of Marvel Comics, one of the foremost heroes, is no longer a hero. He's just an aging guy that just kind of exists. He just kind of floats from one day to the next, and he will until he dies. It's the saddest thing to see a person who exists but doesn't really live. So again, from here, we switch back over to Reed Richards. Now again, what we talked about in the last video was that Reed had basically taken over Latveria. He had taken over the mantle of Dr. Doom, not in the sense that he'd become like a villain. It's not like Reed Richards put on the outfit of Victor Von Doom and was like, I am now the new Dr. Doom. He had just kind of taken up residence there in Latveria. And the whole basis behind this was, the death of the Fantastic Four, basically, Susan and Johnny Storm, really the rise of superpowers among the entirety of the planet Earth. All that rests on the shoulders of Reed Richards. And the reason for this is because what Reed had done is he had basically accessed or learned about vibranium inside of Wakanda. And because he and Black Panther were such close friends, and because there was just like an energy shortage across the world, what ended up happening is Reed had actually gone to Wakanda, petitioned, T'Challa, used vibranium, and intended to basically turn sound waves and convert sound waves into energy, light, and different things like that, that could in turn basically power the world. What it meant is that the world would achieve like a higher state of being. It would achieve a greater enlightenment. Humanity wouldn't have to focus on whether or not people in their countries have enough to eat, or whether or not they have electricity, or they have running water, or anything like that. All those would be a foregone conclusion. That was ultimately the idea of Reed, but notice this falls in line with the nature of Reed. Now in truth, the idea of like trying to fix the problem of everything, that didn't come until almost a decade after the story was written, but that was a natural progression. When Jonathan Hickman introduced that into Reed Richards, it wasn't a paradigm shift for his character. It wasn't a total 180. A man who's obsessed with science, a man who's obsessed with fixing the world's problems, the most natural progression is to solve the problem of everything. But where Reed is, a guy who's known for science, the truth of the matter is that Reed is a slave to science. And so in this instance, when he was trying to solve the world's problems, because it went awry, he's basically kind of stuck in his own, inner hell, more or less, of trying to figure out the solution. What went wrong? Where did I screw up? What happened? That's really all it is. That's the governing factor that controls his life. What happened? What went wrong? And what can be done to fix it? And he lives his life day in and day out trying to find an answer to that question. He's literally governed by his own mistakes. And so the result is that when he basically offers this explanation, when he says, look, somewhere along the line, something happened and there was some kind of an explosion, and this energy, this vibranium energy, was basically just dispersed throughout the entirety of the planet Earth, and suddenly people started gaining powers. The factor is what caused it, because Reed's idea is that the vibranium energy caused it, but we know that's not the case. Vibranium doesn't give people powers. It doesn't work that way. And so the result is that something had to happen. Vibranium was the means by which it could be transmitted, but like something had to give people powers. And the question is, what was that thing? And that's what Reed hasn't figured out yet. And so where the Inhumans kind of talk about, if we had enough time, we could probably figure it out. When Reed says the catalyst he used to achieve this was vibranium, suddenly heads start turning. And the reason why is because somewhere along the line, the Inhumans abandoned Earth. When everybody started getting powers, the Inhumans left. There was no reason for them to be there anymore. The Inhumans left to basically colonize a new world and to start over again. But when they got through, they discovered another world where basically it had been totally destroyed and obliterated, but the people who inhabited that world were encased in a kind of material of sorts, but they were still alive. They were just kind of in a state of suspended animation. And where the Inhumans had considered rescuing them, what they discovered was that the source of this explosion, at least it seemed, was vibranium. And so that's really kind of what they bring to the table is, look, if what you did was use vibranium and somehow that in turn gave everybody powers in one form or another, meaning that you basically used it as an energy source and dispersed it across the world, you've doomed the planet, because we don't necessarily know exactly what it was that caused that planet to erupt. But what we do know is that vibranium was tapped into it somehow. Now, if you know the truth about what happened, do not spoil it. I swear to God, I will, like punishments will be handed down swift and harsh, but it's cool. This is one of those things where it's like everybody has a piece of the puzzle, but it turns out the puzzle they're solving is not the actual puzzle they're looking for. So that's what's cool about this whole thing. But switching back to Namor the Submariner, the whole situation with him, again, like he's just kind of like rallying these folks up, and that's traditional Namor stuff. I mean, one thing to bear in mind is that Namor and Aquaman are very similar when it comes to that regard. I mean, Namor appeared before Aquaman, but Namor and Aquaman are very, similar in that regard, in the sense that it is one of those scenarios where their allegiance is to the sea. Aquaman, Namor the Submariner, they've been part of their own respective superhero teams. Namor's been an Avenger, Aquaman's been part of the Justice League, but when the question is asked, if you have to choose between like your superhero team and the superheroes of Earth and like Atlantis, which one do you guys pick? And they always choose Atlantis every single time, without fail. They never hit that mark. It's I'm a king first and a superhero second. And that's the role that Namor the Submariner plays. The problem with this is that while he's basically going on a rampage in New York and Captain America and Wyatt Wingfoot are watching it all unfold, suddenly Namor stops. He simply just stops and calms down, and that's it, and just descends down to the surface and slowly starts walking towards some person. And that's when we end up finding out the Red Skull is not the Red Skull. It's just some teenage kid who has somehow managed to take the entirety of California and place the entire state under his control. Now at this point, we kind of go on to a side mission of sorts with Reed and the Inhumans. And the reason why is because, remember, when it comes to the Inhumans, the whole reason that they're here, they're supposed to basically be finding a prince of sorts, a person who's supposed to be marrying Luna, the daughter of Quicksilver and Crystal. As soon as they find that person, presumably, they would just leave. They would say, okay, cool, it's time for us to go again. And they would just kind of bail out. And so the whole idea for Reed is to basically, offer some measure of help. Again, kind of feeding into the idea of him trying to solve his own problems, calm these inner demons, so to speak. But what it would also do is help to give some insight potentially into how it was everybody got powers. And so the result of this is that where Reed initially sits down and says, it seems almost impossible to differentiate between the Inhumans and basically mutated humans, it suddenly dawns on him to grab Cerebro. Now of course, most everybody knows who, what Cerebro is, the device that Xavier used to basically locate mutants on Earth to differentiate between humans and then those who had an X gene. But it is kind of cool because Reed's response is, well, we can modify it and we can basically use that to find like Inhumans. And then from those Inhumans, we can sort out who this prince is that you're supposed to be locating and who it is that's supposed to marry Luna. Now at this point, we switch back over to Captain America again, and this is really, really cool. It's probably one of the coolest moments in the whole story, because what ends up happening here is Captain America basically approaches this young kid and essentially says, you can't do this. Now remember, Captain America is basically holding on to a dead ideology. He's holding on to the realm of freedom, basically saying people should have the right to live their lives as they see fit. But that's what you're seeing here. People achieved ultimate freedom when it came to everybody having superpowers. And instead of saying, okay, we should do this responsibly, people just descended into madness and chaos. So sure, people had freedom and they used that freedom to destroy themselves. And so because of that, Captain America is just kind of a relic. He's an archaic thing. He's not relevant anymore. And so when he approaches this kid and starts talking to him, the initial response of the kid is, hey, look, I can do anything I want to. And that's when it starts to dawn on Wyatt Wingfoot in Captain America that this kid's power is mind control. And that's what he's doing. He's mind controlling every single person in this vicinity and has them all under his command. What he's also doing is effectively building an army, because like so many petty warlords that exist in the United States right now, what you have are people who realize I've got powers and I can use these powers to give myself even more power. And that's what a ton of people are doing. But where Captain America steps in and goes to attack this kid, suddenly he gets a flashback and he sees Bucky Barnes. And that's the power of this kid. Notice this kid's power is almost identical to like Mastermind, Jason Wingard. Now that's kind of one of those funny situations. When it comes to like powers in Marvel Comics, in a lot of ways, a lot of them are basically identical. They're just used in different ways, or they have little caveats. The power of Jason Wingard is to manipulate the 5 senses. Whatever you can like see, touch, smell, taste, and hear, he can manipulate it. So he can take away your sense of taste. He can take away your sense of smell. Or he can make you believe that if you're eating a piece of pizza, that you're actually tasting a lemon. There's all kinds of different things that he can do with you. Now, the effect of him doing that is the exact same effect as if Charles Xavier controlled your mind and made you believe that you were somewhere else. It all kind of comes out to the same thing. But the fact remains, kind of going off this tangent and in this story, Bucky Barnes, again, is basically dead. He's long since been dead. There is no Winter Soldier. Bucky Barnes died. He's been dead all this time. And so the cool thing about this is that in this instance, Captain America is literally hallucinating that he's in World War II and that he's trying to save Bucky Barnes. But where he starts to freak out and then eventually snaps out of it, Wyatt Wingfoot is basically taken over, and then this huge army of Red Skull just kind of descends down onto Captain America. And the result is that where they're all screaming and they're all basically saying, we don't want to do this. You have to help us. We don't want to be the ones that are doing this. We don't mean to hurt you. Captain America has to effectively abandon everyone and run away. And that's what's so screwed up about that. It's Captain America who effectively walks out on humanity yet again. And that's what's kind of crazy, is because we would expect Captain America to stay there and fight, but it's also one of those things of run away, live to fight another day, but find a way to bring this down and set the world back to rights. And that's kind of the cool thing about Captain America in this instance. But at this point, we basically jump back to New York, essentially with, I want to say it's Betty Ross, who was mutated and ended up, becoming like this demon looking thing, this crazy looking thing. And where she's initially set upon by Hydra, they're met by the arrival of the Incredible Hulk and Bruce Banner. Now, this is kind of interesting. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe we're given an explanation as to why it is the Incredible Hulk and Bruce Banner are two distinctly different people. Although now that I think about it, I think we are given an explanation. I mean, it's not in this particular part of the story, but I think we are given an explanation in terms of like how the whole thing with Banner and the Hulk works. The way this works is that Banner's basically blind and he sees through the eyes of the Incredible Hulk. So it's kind of cool, but it is an interesting scenario because basically Hulk's almost like this giant gorilla form, which is kind of cool to be honest, but the whole idea is to essentially show up, to basically go visit, you know, Doctor Strange in the Sanctum Sanctorum. But when they get there, when they get to where the Sorcerer Supreme is at, of course they are met by Wong, but what we end up discovering is that Doctor Strange isn't here. Instead, the current Sorcerer Supreme is the niece of Dormammu, also known as Clea. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.